This is Ed Rogers, and I'm here to show you how it's all connected. With Barack Obama and his buddies at the UN doing everything in their power to force a two-state solution on Israel, I thought I'd shed some light on the whole Israeli occupation claim, since it's the basis for their arguments against Israel. It's time for a short history lesson. At the end of World War I, the great Ottoman Empire came to an end. After the war, the Allied forces divided up its land into separate new nations. The war left the British in control of the entire area known as Palestine. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, promising to aid in the establishment of a homeland for the Jewish people in the area known as Palestine. A League of Nations mandate in 1922 reinforced the idea. The area under consideration for such a homeland consisted of Israel's traditional biblical borders west of the Jordan River, as well as most of what is now Jordan east of the Jordan River. While the entire region was referred to as Palestine, there was no mention of a Palestinian state, for there were no people in the region who referred to themselves as Palestinians, and thus no Palestinian people to be oppressed. There was no Palestinian land for any foreign power to occupy, no Palestinian culture to be disrupted. Non-Jews were primarily Arabs and were referred to as Arabs, not Palestinians. Despite the promises to Israel, Great Britain gave away 80% of what was considered Palestine to the Arabs as a thank you gift for their assistance in fighting Germany and the Turks. This is how Jordan came into existence. The land remaining for Israel was less than half of what was originally promised and was all on the west side of the Jordan River. On February 14, 1947, the British officially turned the fate of the residents of Palestine over to the United Nations. A two-state solution was eventually offered, but at Israel's expense. The UN General Assembly voted to further divide the portion remaining after the creation of Jordan into a Jewish state and an Arab state with an international zone in Jerusalem. Israel reluctantly accepted the offer. The Arabs wanted no part of the plan. A Palestinian state had been offered, considered, and refused. On May 14, 1948, Israel declared its independence. In defiance of UN Resolution 181, the surrounding Arab nations attacked Israel. Most Arabs living in Israel, which amounted to around 600,000, voluntarily fled to the West Bank, the same area previously offered as a Palestinian state. They expected to return to their homes after the invading Arab armies had pushed all the Israelites into the Mediterranean. To everyone's surprise, Israel won the war and declared its independence. The surrounding 80 million Arabs could have easily absorbed the West Bank refugees into their countries, but chose to leave them there to show the world what those Zionist imperialists supposedly did to these poor people. With no assistance from their Arab brothers, these people spent the next 19 years living in mud huts, fed and clothed by the United Nations. Much of that aid money came from the United States. This is how most Palestinians came to be in the West Bank. It was during this war that Syria captured the Golan Heights. For 19 years, Syria used this strategic mountain range to shell Israeli kibbutz sites around the Sea of Galilee. An armistice line of 1949 was established, but the Arab leaders claimed it had no political significance. Their claim, therefore, applied to the West Bank and Jerusalem, which Jordan took and held throughout the war. Despite Jordan's occupation of the West Bank, Israel's claim to the region has been recognized by the entire international community until Israeli occupation claims began in recent years. In 1967, Israel carried out preemptive airstrikes against Egypt and Syria after learning of their plans to attack Israel. Despite Egypt's losses, President Nasser convinced King Hussein of Jordan to attack Israel. When Jordan attacked, Israel responded. When the fighting ceased, Israel had taken the West Bank and Jerusalem from Jordan. To the south, she had seized the Sinai back from Egypt, which she would ultimately give back as part of a peace settlement. To the north, she had taken the Golan Heights from Syria. Fast forward to today. The world is trying to force Israel back to what is being called the pre-67 borders. As we have seen, they are really referring to the armistice lines of 1949, which were never universally recognized. As far as the West Bank is concerned, Israel was first recognized as the legal owner. Jordan occupied it after joining in the war in direct violation of UN Resolution 181. When Jordan attacked again in 1967, Israel took it back in a defensive struggle. To this day, there is no such thing as a Palestinian people with a Palestinian culture and a Palestinian language. They never had a land of their own for Israel to occupy. If any nation was an occupier, it was Jordan. Therefore, all claims of Israeli occupation, especially in the West Bank, are not based on the historical record and are, in fact, based only on a desire to promote anti-Semitism. Now you know the truth. And lastly, to lighten things up a bit, here's my thought for today. What is the shortest distance between two jokes? A straight line. I'm just saying, and now you know. I invite you to check out my website at edrogers.net, where you'll see my books, blogs, and newsletters. Until our next program, this is Ed Rogers, showing you how. It's all connected.